Good morning, Revolution, and welcome to our broadcast this morning. All of our comrades and friends and fellow travelers. I don't like that word, fellow travelers, but anyway, welcome, whether you are or not. We got a lot to talk about this morning. There's welfare cheats in Mississippi. There's the Cuban families. I was told it's FAMLIES because it refers to multiple forms of families. New law in Cuba. Biden's hunger summit at the White House, I believe it was on Wednesday, just before the hurricane hit Florida. And our mailbag question. But speaking of the hurricane, we want to wish all of our friends and comrades and their families well. It was a terrific, close to Category 5 storm that hit Florida. And we have Justine Medina with us here this morning, who is from the great state of Florida. And Anita has family in Florida. Justine, how's your family? How's everybody down there?
Um, my family is all safe and well. A lot of my family lives in the Tampa area, so they just got heavy rains. The storm missed them. Um, but I've been following the storm closely and watching the footage, and it's really bad for working families that were in the path of it for sure.
And Anita, your people down there, they're okay?
My people are just fine. We're located right in the middle of the peninsula, so kind of. But I thought that would really protect them from these kind of storms. But this one went right up the spine of Florida, and so did Irma 5 or 6 years ago. So there's no protection anymore, given the severity of these storms and the way they're intensifying like in hours into the next category up. So it's really scary, and there's just going to be worse going forward, I'm afraid.
And it hit on the west coast of the state in the Gulf area, and now it's moving east, and it's coming up South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. It'll be here in New York in a day or
Georgia,
two. So
right.
get out your umbrellas, and we hope everybody stays safe. I understand in Florida from our producer Taryn, whose mom is also down there, so we're wishing her well as well. That in Fort Myers there was a prison, and they refused to move the prisoners. We hope everyone is okay there as well. And while we're in the deep south of these United States, Scott, welfare cheaters in Mississippi. There's a big
Well,
scandal there involving Republicans and athletes and hypocrisy and what do you call that? Gross malfeasance or something like that.
and
Happened.
probably gross, and certainly just naked disdain and contempt for poor people. So, for the past uh, 40 some years, Republicans have been on about how, welfare recipients are trying to cheat the system, welfare fraud. Oh, we got to means test everybody. Oh, we got to, make sure nobody's using food stamps to buy something they might enjoy or whatever. Well, what's happening in Mississippi is that the state has been, or the Republican leadership of the state has been using money from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Fund, and funneling it to stuff like, university sports stadiums, like bogus consulting fees for celebrities, athletes, including Brett Favre. But it's really just, it shows you so much about uh, capitalism in general and the extreme right in particular. It's, you know, they talk on the surface about how, it's working class people are the ones trying to game the system. No, the system is being gamed by the rich. They're the cheats. They're the liars.
That's a very, very important point. And there's also, Anita, a big disparity in terms of how some of the figures who are involved in this are treated. And I came across a interview with Harry Edwards, And if people will remember, Harry Edwards was a sociologist in California at the University of California, Berkeley, who, when Tommy Edwards and Juan Carlos protested the '68 Olympics, remember when they raised the fist
Mhm.
in a protest, Harry Edwards wrote a very famous book outlining sports and racism. And he draws attention to how Brett Favre, who's an NFL Hall of Famer, his daughter was at a university in Mississippi, and he tried to press the governor, no, not the governor, but the head of the welfare agency to divert money to that. He was warned that that might be illegal, and he did it anyway. He hasn't been charged yet, but if it had been a black or a Latino or an Asian athlete, oh my God, they would have called for his head and neck and fingers and toes and everything else, Anita.
It's
Big
true. Yeah.
hypocrisy in that respect.
I don't even, I'm not a big football fan, so I don't know much about this guy, but I think this really reminds me of back in the 70s. We used to say there's money in poverty, and call people poverty pimps who were making money, privately for their nonprofit corporations and so forth off of the poverty programs that were instituted in the late 60s. And I think what's different now is these block grants that states have that just open up all kinds of opportunities for corruption and for mismanagement. This in Ohio, the grants sometimes go to those fake crisis pregnancy centers and other, even if they're not illegal, they're nefarious, and they're not effective against poverty in this country. It's just, and Mississippi has one of the highest poverty rates in the country, and they refuse to expand Medicaid. So they refuse some federal money if it's going to help the poor, but they just help themselves to what is there through these block grants.
Justine, highest poverty rate, highest rate of children uh, failed pregnancies, women not able to have prenatal care, highest illiteracy rate, you name it. And on down the line, uh, and these guys are just ripping off poor people. And it was discovered by a newscaster who found out that the families who were eligible for welfare assistance and foods weren't getting it because they stole $10 million. Outrageous, no?
And then
It's outrageous, uh, and this is it's discovered by a journalist, which is why, of course, the fascists are trying to cut the free press, and all the big businesses are buying up small local papers, so you can't even report on the crimes that they're doing. Well, while criminalizing poverty and um, just leaving hundreds of millions of people to be desperate. No, it's really quite uh, sickening and awful. And yeah, Mississippi is the worst, but so many states um, have these neoliberal means testing policies in place for their welfare programs, um, and they allot basically no money to the welfare programs um, at all, while giving away millions in subsidies to big businesses, or um, you know you name it, or the police, to then enrich the rich even further. So it's really disgusting. And we just have to keep doing everything we can to protect each other and take care of each other, and build up, our own alternative networks of solidarity, while pushing the state to be better, because people need to be taken care of now, and the government is just failing them.
And that's why they got rid of the child tax credit. The Republicans voted against it. It was there for several months, and it took for, I don't know, a year or so out of the pandemic. You remember that child tax credit, and now it's gone. That's why it's so important to vote in November.
And just a quick word on that. There was a report that came out in the, I don't know, New York Times or Washington Post a few weeks ago. Uh, the Biden relief programs lifted 20 million people out of poverty. It might be small change next to what China accomplished, but in the United States, it's a big deal. Uh, it was a there were real benefits to working class people um, from electing Biden rather than Trump.
Very important point. When you don't have money, you can't, like where I'm from in Youngstown, all of the jobs are in the suburbs. There are no jobs in the city, zero. But if you don't have a car, you can't travel. And there's really no public transportation to speak of, you know, except the bus that goes up Market Street or goes up, McGuffey Road or goes up another at Himrod, and so you're stuck. You can't get to work, and so you're kind of placed in a position of perpetual poverty because you can't find a job that would be able to bring you out of it. Well,
Can
let's
I
move
can
the
I add can I add
sure.
something,
Go
Joe?
ahead, Anita. Add
Just
away.
what you said about the wealthy taking advantage of these programs. I actually have a history as a bureaucrat. I worked for the Medicaid program in New York City, and in my district was the Upper East Side. And I was constantly shocked by these little old ladies who were showing how they spent down their last $3 or $4 million, and now they were poor and eligible for Medicaid, and their lawyer children managed to do the paperwork to slip them through loopholes. So there's a lot of people taking advantage of these programs that really they're not intended to take advantage of. So I agree with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that addition. Well, while we're talking about the South, if we go a little bit further south, 90 miles south of most southern tip of Florida, there's the great island of Cuba. And they recently passed a families, plural, leave law. I'm sorry, a families act, which provides equality to diverse families, but also, Justine, protects different categories of families, people who are disabled,
Hmm.
grandparents, women
Hmm.
from acts of violence, and so on and so forth. Big achievement, no?
Huge, huge achievement. I mean, I it's funny because it's such a big achievement that you're seeing all of the papers, even in the mainstream press, are talking about it a little bit, right? They're forced to, but they're all talking about it, saying Cuba passes gay marriage because this is downplaying what Cuba has managed to do. Um, they not only of course, passed same sex marriage and civil unions, they redefined what a family means to remove any notion of gender being in the mix at all and just defining it by bonds of solidarity and care and fraternity, and people who live together to take care of each other. And of course, this on top of their already really extensive healthcare laws for LGBT individuals, for transgender care. But as you mentioned, it's so far beyond even LGBTQ protections, right? There's a whole new section on disability rights. There's a new child bill of rights, a new elder bill of rights. There's protections for women against domestic violence. Um, and when you add all of these things up and you also look at their other, really wonderful rights around abortion protections and care, it becomes really obvious that Cuba now has the most progressive laws around gender, around family in the Western Hemisphere and possibly in the world. And they did this not from the legislators at top writing the law, which is still good to have those protections, but they did it through massive plebiscites. So the sort of most direct level democracy, mass participation, 8 million people participating in crafting these laws. So it's really, Cuba continues to be a beacon of light for the world, even with the gross blockade against it. So I've just been like alternatively like smiling and crying about this new families law all week, because it's just really revolutionary, truly.
Not bad for a country that's considered a dictatorship by the U.S. ruling class, Scott. And and
and
and this issue emerged several years ago when they were adopting a new constitution, as I understand it, and it was debated in the assembly, and there was some pushback, and the whole process, as Justine suggested, was set in motion. You want to talk a little bit about that, Scott?
um
Uh,
yeah, sorry.
oh, as to the process, I think I'll probably have to uh, throw that one back to Justine. I do know that in general, Cuba has, when they make these big sort of fundamental laws, they craft proposals in the legislature, and they take them out to the people, and they have mass meetings everywhere, and they present them and they discuss them, and people give feedback, and then they recraft them, and then they put them up for a vote. So it's an intensely democratic process, and I think it's worth asking. There have been a number of big steps forward for LGBTQ plus equality in this country, um, uh, but nothing so fundamental as Cuba. And I think we have to sort of recognize that socialism isn't just a model of a society. It it's the basis for dealing with problems in a much more democratic and much more advanced way. So with all of the strength of the LGBTQ rights movement in this country, we still haven't been able to make as much progress as Cuba has, and that's because socialism advances democracy, protects democracy in a much more fundamental way than capitalism can.
Mhm.
And it also suggests a new definition, a redefinition of humanity and what it means to be a person, and an acceptance of diverse forms of that, which is really important, Justine. You were going to make a comment,
No,
Justine?
I'm sorry. I thought you were addressing me with the question when it went to Scott, but he's absolutely right. I mean, it was a series of meetings and votes building towards that, and it's worth noting that it could have passed before during the constitutional changes, but it would have been much slimmer, and the the government and the Communist Party in Cuba really wanted it to be a consensus. They wanted there to be mass unity around the changes. So they undertook a huge public education campaign, as part of these meetings to sort of push back against reactionary forces. And 2/3 of the people that voted, voted for it. And one comment I did want to make, though, that I just think it's really excellent. In the manifesto, right, there's this great line where Marx says, abolition of the family, even the most radical of people, dislike this proposition by the communists. And it's like the Cuban state has basically figured out how to do that, right? They've abolished the notions of the bourgeois family, and like you said, are making it about humanity, which is what it should be about.
There are diverse forms of the family, and it's the abolition of a family in which patriarchy dominates, Anita. And I think
Exactly.
that's the important thing.
And
Am I right?
patriarchy is centuries and centuries old in Cuba. I mean, the Spanish brought that with the conquistadors, and I'm afraid it was so lodged in Cuban society. But this, like Scott and Justine said, the accomplishment of this code shows you what can be accomplished in getting people's needs taken care of when capital isn't around to interfere or really is crippled in interfering with what people really need and what is, as you said, the humane method, the humane approach to these questions. So I think it's just really exciting, and I think it will be great for Cuban women and everybody in Cuba. So I think it's very impressive.
And speaking of families, there's hunger in America, hunger in American families. And on Wednesday, the White House held a hunger summit because something like 12, 15% of families in this country, children, are going hungry in the richest country of the world, in the world. Um, I guess that's still true. I'm not sure because there's such competition taking place amongst some of the, and and that competition is taking place within context of a very deep and profound capitalist crisis. So who's richest or who is a matter of debate. We'll have to take that up in one edition of Good Morning Revolution. But Anita, I thought that the fact that the Congress mandated that the White House have such a summit was important, and they pulled it together quickly. And they're supposed to come up with programs that will help alleviate hunger. I don't know why they call it hunger security. That's such a weird way of framing things. Hunger is hunger. I mean, and if you're hungry,
Food
you're not
insecurity.
food insecurity. Did you
Mm.
follow that, Anita? What did you
Uh,
think about the?
Well, actually, when I Googled this summit this morning, what I found was the 19 articles about the 1969 summit held by Nixon at the time, and one of their recommendations was a $5,500 annual minimum income for a family of four. In today's dollars, that would be $44,000 a year, guaranteed minimum income, and of course many of those proposals were not enacted back in 1969, but there was the beginnings of some programs. But I was just struck with the GOP calling this a partisan conference, as if hunger is a partisan issue, and it's a national bipartisan disgrace that 13 million households can't feed their children, can't feed their families. That's just a national disgrace, and I think I applaud the effort to end hunger in America by 2030 or whatever their goal is. I think it's doable, totally.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Anita, the Nixon conference in 1968, because did Tricky Dick really give a good goddamn about American hunger? Or was it the fact that it took place in 1968 on the top of a whole uh, evolution? Actually, it was a civil rights and democratic revolution that took place uh, on, beginning in the 61, 62, the March on Washington, and the rebellions that took place after Dr. King was murdered. And it was in those circumstances that the Republican Party called for that hunger uh, summit. They were compelled to.
Mhm.
They didn't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They were compelled, which is, again, is so important to vote and struggle. We need mass social movements to put pressure on the ruling class, because when you do that, even a right wing so and so like Richard Nixon and John, what was his attorney general, John Mitchell, and the rest of them are compelled to respond. Scott.
Yeah. So, Anita, you mentioned that the you applaud the goal of ending hunger by 2030. So do I. Obviously, I mean, I think everyone should. We should keep in mind that the ruling class of this country holds the resources, not even in active use, just hoarding them away to end hunger tomorrow, right? We have the resources in this country to provide dignity and security and safe housing and food and medical care and education to every single person. And what's stopping it is that the ruling class has hoarded these resources away in the name of their property rights. So this is it's something that we it is long overdue, and we deserve. Uh, I mean, the working class deserves it all because the working class produces it all.
Does anybody think that hunger can be eliminated? Justine, do you think hunger can be eliminated under current conditions now by 2030?
I mean, I don't think that the current government will attempt to eliminate hunger by 2030. I think, as Scott said, it absolutely could be eliminated. We have the resources. We see in other countries, in the socialist countries, um, and even somewhat in the welfare programs of the social democratic countries, how hunger can actually be tackled. It's not a hypothetical. um, but yeah, I agree with Scott. It's a choice. They could absolutely do it. I think that the Biden administration also felt pressure to have this summit, because they're seeing other countries around the world like China that are actually eliminating poverty and tackling hunger in real ways. They're seeing unrest and dissatisfaction from the workers of this country, and they want to at least put on a show, and of course do more than the fascists would do. No question there. It's better to have Biden in the White House than Trump, but it is just a show. Um, you know, I was reading that the White House was talking about how it was excited that it got 8 billion in contributions from private companies to go towards hunger alleviation. So like not even government subsidies, and yet at the same time, what we sent another 13 billion to war weapons in Ukraine. I think again yesterday. So it's like you can sort of see from the reality of where the government spends its money, what it is devoted towards doing. But yeah, I think we can absolutely end hunger. We have the resources to, if we can come together and pressure and force our elected leaders to. By 2030, the working class deserves nothing less.
It's all about building a mass movement and putting in place elected officials who are responsive to that mass movement. So once again, it's really important to vote. Anita, what do you think? I mean, will it take to put the question in Scott Hylian terms, a decisive defeat of the right in order to eliminate hunger, or is it possible to do it without that?
I'm not sure. I'm not as sure as Scott is to know when is we have decisively defeated the right. But I think this is a positive development, and we can hold their feet to the fire and just keep pushing. And like you said, massive outrage that anybody in this country is unable to feed their family. And I think that one of the pressures that was brought this conference about was the increasing need and the increasing poverty and difficulty for people coming out of the pandemic period to feed their family. So I think things are getting worse, and they recognize that, and they have to do something. So I think it's possible to make progress. We'll see.
We would be wrong if we didn't, before we finish this point, make the point that while hunger is prevalent in 12% of American families, when you look at Black and Latino families, it's double that. And the highest rate of hunger is in families with single mothers who have the burden of taking care of their children. So Black and Latino, Asian women, single moms, that's where both mom and child are going, and it's double the rate uh, for others. That's, there are, and that ongoing racial and gender based division is part and parcel of monopoly capitalism today. It's been the case for the last 100 years, and it's going to remain the case unless we fundamentally change the system and have working class power so that we can eliminate the basis for those racial and gender based disparities.
And
And,
Joe,
and,
can
and
I say,
yeah, enforce it by law. Justine?
I just wanted to add, in addition to that form of discrimination, it's also worth pointing out. I mean, how many people are, 20 million people are about to go hungry in Afghanistan because we've frozen their assets, right? How many people all over the world, in the global south are hampered by the imperialistic aggressions of monopoly capitalism, so it's all connected.
And the people of Cuba who are right now suffering through a period of intense. The blockade is always present and is always hampering things. But between this recent hurricane, which took out all of the island's power, uh, before that there were fires at fuel storage facilities. Cuba is struggling, and the ruling class of the U.S. has done nothing. Um, there's a story that keeps coming back to my mind when uh, uh, what was it? What was the hurricane that struck New Orleans and overwhelmed the levees? Katrina.
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 Katrina. When that hit, there were in airports in Cuba planes loaded with medical personnel and supplies ready to take off and come to the United States to aid in disaster relief. And you know, George W. Bush said, "Nope, we don't need your help. We don't want your help." And that's what Cuba's willing to do, even for the people of the United States. And the ruling class of our country has done exactly the opposite with them, done nothing but tighten the shackles on them, and it's really cruel and inexcusable, I think.
Very good. Quite agree. Our last point this morning is our mailbag question. Can we put the mailbag question up? Because in order to decisively defeat the right, we need greater left unity, greater working class unity, greater all people's unity. And how are we going to get it? And here's the question that we were asked. Now that the main Trotsky organizations are technically no longer, uh, are there prospects for deeper cooperation and or even eventual fusion? Anita, what do you think?
Well, my first thought is you shouldn't have an odd number of parentheses in any sentence, but I can't help myself there. But I think, I mean, if I don't know the details. I don't read the tracts and the writings, the voluminous writings that are coming out of different parties that claim to be communist. But I think if people in the United States are communist and they're Marxist Leninist, they embrace historical materialism, they should just join the Communist Party USA, which is the oldest and most established and best structured and strongest history. I think we can unite, and I think we would like to see, we welcome more members of the party. But I think it's well, we'll see. I think there still are real differences. I don't know the details of these different groups, but sometimes they do things that are not what we would do and not what we see as in the best interest of the uniting the working class as a whole. So thank you
Justine, what do
very
you
much.
think? These groups,
Uh, I think that the party's basic position of building coalitions based on issues and goals and projects applies here very much, right? We don't make alliances based on what organization someone is with or what party someone is with. We work towards uniting working class people primarily through issues. I always hope for unity. I don't think that the near future is going to see any mergers of PSL or WWP or DSA or any group with us, but I think that as long as we stay focused on the issues, we can avoid the sectarianism and work towards a better world for the working class.
Scott, your view?
Uh, you know, I guess I'm kind of with Justine and Anita on this. The unity we look for is the unity of the working class and unity between the working class and its allies in the broad movement for democracy. So the idea of left unity, of uniting different Marxist groups, is not a high priority. That said, I hope that I think that as struggles progress, as the crisis of capitalism deepens, as the fight back strengthens, more and more the theory and strategy and tactics of our party are the benefit is becoming clear. Our emphasis on unity, our emphasis on the role of electoral struggle as one key tool of political struggle. These things are the emphasis on overthrowing capitalism and replacing it with working class power. Those are things that are becoming clear, and hopefully, more people will be drawn to that.
The problem isn't Trotskyism or Maoism or this little left click or that little. The problem was middle class radicalism and the political practice that developed when people joined these groups. And their emphasis, as Justine and Scott and Anita put it, on coming together ideologically, when the emphasis ought to be coming together on the basis of issues, people, issues. We can unite on fighting for the PRO Act, fighting for reproductive rights, fighting to end the blockade against Cuba, fighting to end the war. If we can come together, and when we think about unity, let's think about unity for the broad working class left, which is anti-corporate and anti-racist and anti-sexist and opposed to homophobia, opposed to discrimination against disabled people. Let's unite the American majority and give up this illusion that we're going to, if you brought together all these little cliques, you wouldn't have enough people to fill up half of 23rd Street. Lenin once said, politics begins with the millions. The Communist Party USA today said politics begins with the hundreds of millions. You gotta have broad working class movement to compel change. That's what we gotta be about. Men and women and differently gendered people, Black, white, Latino, Asian, all walks of life, fighting for a new society. Let that be our emphasis. Now, before we end today, we want to give a shout out to a wonderful comrade of ours who's been around for a century plus. Her name is Bea Lumpkin. She's 103 or 104, and she's going to undergo a heart procedure. And she discovered, check this out, y'all, that every day Bea walks 23 flights of steps as part of her exercise routine to her apartment in Chicago. She discovered that she was slightly out of breath. And so she called her heart doctor, and her heart doctor diagnosed it. But then they had to decide how and if to treat, because the older you get, the less chances you get treatment. Because they say it's really not worth it. It's too expensive. You're at the end of your life anyway. Forget about it.
Mm.
So he had to consult with another doctor. So he went to her and he said, "Hear me out now." Those were his first words, according to the story. And he described Bee's condition and who she was. The doctor was still skeptical, so they brought her in and they met and talked with her. And then the story says that Bee demonstrated her agility with a karate kick. And that was the Bee, we wish you well. And the
Mm.
big lesson is that if you want to live a long and productive and constructive life, join the Communist Party. It's good for your health, good for your psychological well-being, and
Bee organized her first workplace in 1936 when she was 15 years old.
15 years old. Long live Bea Lumpkin. Stay strong, stay safe,
Yes.
stay in the fight. Justine, thank you for joining us. Justine is an
Thank you.
organizer with the Amazon Union, leader of the YCL in the New York District of the Communist Party. Very happy to have you. Come back, Anita, Scott, take care. Everybody have a good weekend.
Later,
Bye,
comrades.
everybody.